Panorama Cycles is a Canadian-based bike company focused on the adventurous side of the biking world. Releasing their first bike in 2016, they haven't been around long, but looking at their current offerings, you'd never know it. Their latest release is called the Torngat Ti, a titanium-framed fat bike with some very interesting features, including the ability to change the QFactor, or how far apart your feet are, depending on what riding you want to do. A couple of months ago, Panorama sent me one of their first production models to try out, and in this video, I'm going to give my thoughts on what I think of this unique fat bike. The Torngat Ti is a bike that Panorama bills as the perfect bike for trail riding and expeditions during summer and winter. It's a titanium frame, obviously, paired with a carbon fork with a taller than normal 495 axle to crown to better match a 120mm suspension fork. It has mounting locations all over, external cable routing excluding the dropper post, and is based on the taller 27.5 fat wheel size. I've taken the bike on a lot of rides over the past 2 months and really tried to understand how it does in a variety of situations. So let's get into what I've found. On the geometry front, the Torngat Ti is in a unique spot. It has a 67.5 degree head tube angle and a 74.5 degree seat tube angle, which are on the slacker and steeper side for a fat bike. But when you take a look at the reach, the stack, and the chainstay length, you'll find it's a little longer in the rear and a tad shorter in the front than the most progressive fat bikes being made right now. It also has a pretty sizable bottom bracket drop at 70mm, which is 5 to 10 mils more than you'll see on bikes like the Rocky Mountain Blizzard, the Trek Farley, or my personal bike, the RSD Mayor. On paper, the Torngat is a mix of fat bike geometry. It's got a good bit of adventure and touring design, but with a little trail fat bike thrown in for good measure to keep it capable on dirt. The best comparison I could make is that it's like a modernized titanium framed version of the Salsa Heyday, the bike formerly known as Muckluck. I'm a big fan of that bike because it's a real jack of all trades, but I think it's in need of some updates. Like the Heyday, the Torngat Ti puts you in a fairly relaxed riding position, fits big tires, has sliding dropouts, and has all the mounting points you'd expect on any adventure style bike. But in place of the 100mm travel corrected fork, slack seating position, and steep head tube angle, you get more reach and stack, a 120mm focus design, and a 1.5 degree slacker head tube angle, which all come together to make for a much more capable bike. The Torngat is so much more confident in steeper, more technical terrain, but it isn't so modern that it takes a ton of input at slower speeds. I explored some double track I'd never been on in some fresh powder, for example, and it ended up having a lot of steep ups and downs and was pretty torn up and rutted by side-by-sides and dirt bikes. The tricky descents were rideable thanks to the slacker front end and higher stack, while the climbs were doable because of the comfortable riding position and longish chainstays balancing the bike out. It's not as shreddy as, say, the Maverick I'm currently reviewing, but in many ways it rides like a modern cross-country, dare I say downcountry, bike, but with bigger tires. It's stable at high speeds in part due to the low bottom bracket, while still being nimble enough to take tight turns and make quick adjustments as needed. I didn't get a chance to run a 120mm suspension fork on it, but I've ridden enough fat bikes to know that it would make the bike capable of taking on technical trails with rocks and roots, drops, and jumps. I did take it down a flowy jump line on a visit to Boise, Idaho, and despite having no suspension, I found it to be easy to get into the air, even with my poor jumping form, and it was just generally fun to ride. As I mentioned in my first video, I was on a medium frame while I'd normally be on a large. I'm on the edge of the two sizes, so it wasn't a huge deal, but there were times when things got a little rowdier that I wished the bike was a bit bigger to lengthen my body out. I don't think this was because of the design of the bike, but mostly just had to do with the sizing. One of the biggest selling points for the Torngat Ti is the adjustable QFactor. It's not all that uncommon for people to have a hard time with fat bikes because the wide stance of their feet can cause some hip or knee discomfort. While this bike does require a fairly normal width for a fat bike for the 4.5-inch tires, if you want to run 4-inch tires or 29 plus in the summer, you can swap down to the narrower spindle and get a slightly wider than a normal mountain bike QFactor. Due to the timing of things, I was only able to run it with the narrower spindle for a couple of rides, but it's an immediately noticeable difference that changes the way you feel on the bike. I rode it this way with 29 plus tires, and it felt more like a quote unquote normal mountain bike than any other fat bike frame I've ridden. Yeah, it's not the most progressive geometry out there, and I was on a smaller than typical size for me, but I was amazed at how different the narrower stance made the bike feel. On that note, a lot of people are going to compare this to another narrow QFactor fat bike, the Otso Wojtek, or the Wojtek 2 now. Similar to the Torngat, the Wojtek has a QFactor in the mid 180s. Unlike the Torngat though, I'm not a big fan of how they've had to dish the wheel to one side to achieve the narrower QFactor with big tires. It makes it so that if you want to get another wheel set, or if anything goes wrong with your current ones, you're looking at custom builds instead of being able to get any wheel off the shelf or pull that one you already have. With the Torngat, you do have to put in a little extra work and swap the spindle, but it's not complicated. It literally takes 10 minutes or less, and realistically is something you'll do a few times a year at most. I'm not bashing on the Wojtek. I think it's a really sweet bike and maybe fits into a different category slightly with the carbon frame and everything, but I think it's an important thing to consider between the two bikes. Something I really appreciated about this bike is how thoughtful and intentional the design and build and everything is. The build options aren't flashy, but they're reliable and have money going to the right places. The drivetrain, for example, comes in SLX or XT 12-speed, both of which shift super well and are known for being reliable workhorse drivetrains. The brakes are where some people might complain, with SRAM Level and Level T being the two choices. I totally acknowledge these brakes aren't the strongest and aren't industry leading in any aspect, but I've put thousands of miles on them and I've never once had an issue. They just always work reliably and predictably, and that's even in super frigid temperatures. The mule foot wheel set similarly is easy to set up tubeless. It's not terrifyingly heavy, and it's about as reliable and boring and common as a Toyota Camry, but I mean that in a positive way. My biggest complaint here would just be the tires. I've ridden the 45 North Dillinger 5s a few times, and honestly, I've just never clicked with them. They feel kind of like an XC race tire, so they do well in fast, smooth, high traction situations, but once it gets powdery or loose, or you're pushing your speed pretty hard, I just don't feel super confident on them. I've tried all kinds of different pressures, and yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan when the trail surface isn't smooth or perfectly groomed. Luckily, it's not the only option, so if you don't like the Dillinger 5s, get the other ones. Moving on to the frame itself, the build quality is just top notch. Some evidence for that is the fact that this frame is belt compatible. I think a lot of people are going to love that. That means the rear seat stay has a split in it, but it's so well done, it's hard to even notice unless you're really looking closely. The welds also look great, the finish is beautiful, and there isn't really anything that makes you think, why did they do that? Like me, Panorama doesn't follow the N+1 equation and believes bikes can be designed and used for a lot of different riding disciplines. The Torngat is no exception, and you can see it through these components, the geometry, and all the other little features they've incorporated and thought of here. So, what's this bike for? What's it good at? Who should buy it? In every sense of the word, the Torngat Ti could truly be someone's quiver killer. In the winter, or whenever you want a fat bike, you can go with a rigid fork and run up to a 27.5 by 4.5 inch tire. use that longer spindle, and even lengthen out the chainstay to 465 for an extra stable ride. When the summer hits though, you can throw on a suspension fork and some 29 by 26 or even 25 mountain bike tires and narrow up your stance and go get rowdy. I do wish there was some way to raise the bottom bracket for that setup, maybe an eccentric bottom bracket or something like that, because 70 millimeters is a lot of drop, and so smaller diameter tires may result in more pedal strikes. But I don't know, I guess maybe shorter cranks may be the answer there. Those two setups are just the extreme on either end though. You could run it rigid 29 plus, for example, and go bike packing, or put some skinny, fat 4-inch tires and suspension, use it as a super fun trail exploring bike. The frame is designed around a 120mm fork, which is my favorite amount of travel for a hardtail, but Simon from Panorama said he ran a 140mm fork on a trip to Arizona last year and found it was great. You can do a lot of these same things with most fat bikes out there, but the change in QFactor makes a noticeable difference in how the bike feels, especially when you get into hard cornering situations. If I had to pick a sweet spot for this bike, the situations where this bike really excels, I admit it'd have more than one. As a fat bike, it's going to do really well on greens and blues and double track and tame black trails even. It's going to be a very capable bike in the snow, whether it's groomed or unpacked, with some different tires in my case, of course. And with all the mounting locations, belt drive compatibility, and relaxed sitting position, it'd also be great for someone who loves to bike pack, tour, or take on ultra long winter rides. I had planned to use it in the Fat Pursuit 60K this year, but I got a strain of the flu created by Satan himself just a few days before and missed out on the fun. It would have been a perfect bike for that ride and even the much more challenging 200K route. In what I'd call mountain bike mode, with the narrower spindle, a suspension fork, and 29er or 29 plus tires, the bike becomes a great option for hitting some dirt. I wouldn't hesitate to take it on black diamond trails with decent sized jumps and drops, but I do think it'd be better suited for some natural cut, backcountry type trail riding. It's got the perfect geometry, amount of travel, and tire sizes to get deep in the mountains and explore areas that only a small amount of riders ever get into. So if you're someone who likes the type of riding I'm talking about, and you enjoy fat bike riding whether you get snow or not, and maybe you're looking to minimize how many bikes you've got, the Torngat Ti is a bike I would highly recommend. I want to say thanks again to Panorama for sending this bike out to review. They are quick to respond to emails, love to answer questions, and really stand behind their company and the purpose that they have on their website. If you have any questions I didn't answer, drop those down in the comments and I'll try and give them a shot, try to answer them all down there. If you want to support the channel, check out the stickers I've got down below, send a super thanks, or just share this video with your friends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.